Welcome to episode 60 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined from the Vault Studio on the lovely campus of Grace College and Theological Seminary by my co-host, my good friend, my colleague, and the man who successfully navigated the black ice in his driveway this morning, John Scott Sloat.
That was no small feat.
That's why I wanted to get it recorded for posterity's sake.
Yeah, that was no small feat. It was quite slick this morning out there.
Yes, indeed.
But we survived. We triumphed.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were the victor here.
Yeah, and you know, if you as our listener did not, there's no shame in falling on black ice. There's no shame in that.
It's slick. That's why we talk about it.
It is. We had a former secretary here who, I think if I remember right, like broke her wrist or fractured her wrist by slipping on some black ice here on campus years ago. So
wow.
It's dangerous out there. Watch your step, folks.
Yeah, I always prided myself while I was a student here. It took me till I think my second year of seminary before I fell on the ice walking across campus. And I always found like a sense of pride, which I look back on and go, that was a silly thing to find pride in. But I did at the time.
Yes. Yeah. Can you believe we're at episode 60?
Yeah. Where has the time gone?
You know, we're not far away from our podcast being almost eligible for retirement benefits.
Yeah. That's going to be great.
Yeah. We'll get that government subsidy just rolling right in.
Then we got to start taking those RMDs and all sorts of stuff.
Yes, indeed. So if you want to connect with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Twitter at V&S You can email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We are on Facebook, Various and Sundry Podcast. You can find our page, share it, give us a like, follow along, and even share episodes as we post them. And we are now available on YouTube.
Yeah.
Audio only at this point.
Yeah. Which is my fault. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm far more inclined and willing, I should say, to broach into the video end of things. But the reality is the technical aspects multiply exponentially when you bring video into this.
Yeah.
And the editing ends up, going through the roof in terms of that. So short of us finding some willing Grace student perhaps, I'm not sure that we are going to be in a position to actually do video soon.
Yeah, unless somebody out there wants an internship, which I don't know that we can actually offer.
Who knows?
But
you're the director of the blended program, John. Throw your weight around a little bit.
Well, there's more weight of me than there was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but in more ways than one.
Yeah. So we have talked about doing some video content for the YouTube channel, and I feel like I'm slowly working on you to persuade you to maybe do a little video content that we could do a little some behind the scenes kind of stuff here.
We did a piece of video content last week.
We did. Yes.
Are we ready to talk about that?
Sure. Why not?
So we did a bonus ep where we took over the Grace Story podcast, but I don't want to say slow, but their
production timeline is a little bit slower than ours.
Yeah, and
that's fair.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So it won't be up till the end of March, and I think we've promised not to post that on our YouTube until then.
Correct.
But we plan to. That's bonus content.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that you could do if you go onto YouTube, you could subscribe. That would be a big help.
We did get a new subscriber this week,
so it's exciting. And you could also go on to the podcast app on your Apple device and leave a rating and a review.
Or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Correct.
Stitcher, iHeart, if you can leave a review, do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you can do it on Amazon Music, but I know we're available there now.
Well, yeah, we're on Amazon Music.
It's all part of our master plan to take over the universe.
That's right. One listening ear at a time.
That's right. Slow but steady wins the race here. So, well, as we are recording this on a Monday, February 22nd, we're in a window here where no more football NBA is moving closer to their All-Star weekend, and college basketball is starting to ramp up. We're just under 3 weeks away from the Selection Sunday show, and assuming that COVID doesn't blow things up, we are going to do a bracket challenge.
Yeah. Looking forward to that. That should be a lot of fun.
Yes, and we were going to do that last year. Obviously, stupid COVID got in the way. So I would like to we'll reiterate our offer that the winner of the bracket competition, we will give them a signed copy of one of my books.
Yeah, I'll sign it for them.
Right.
It'll be wonderful.
Indeed. So we'll hook you up.
Yeah, we'll get that set up. We'll have that ready to go for next week. That sound good?
Yeah, we'll try. I mean, I assume that on whatever site we end up using, you can already begin set up the competition.
We'll have that ready to go.
Yeah. All right. We'll put that on your to-do list there.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the NBA first. Have you seen any NBA this last week? Following your Knicks?
Knicks, I think we're 1-2 in the last week, so pretty par for the course. They've been pretty right around or just under 500 for the season. So. But I still don't have cable, so watching them and watching really any NBA has been difficult. But been following some scores.
Yeah.
Been encouraged to beat the Timberwolves. So
okay, all right,
major accomplishment.
Yeah, I think when we recorded last week, they had not announced the extent of Anthony Davis's injury. And so now he's out, I think, another 3 or 4 weeks. They've termed it a calf strain, I think, of some kind. So they haven't specifically said it's Achilles.
But they're in the ballpark of Achilles.
Yeah, exactly. So and it seems like the Lakers are struggling a little bit without him. And I think a little surprising. Like the Nets have been better than I expected, I think.
Well, they just went 5-0 in a West Coast swing.
Yeah.
And beat the Clippers last night, was it?
Yes.
So, yeah, they seem to be coming together.
The question I have, though, is when they get to the playoffs and you can really dial in against one team, will they still be able to both score the way they are and will they be good enough defensively to contain other teams?
Yeah, and I think those are valid questions. I think we've seen that Kevin Durant can certainly play enough defense to make it in the playoffs, and he's such a matchup nightmare.
Yep.
But I think it'll be interesting to see how James Harden particularly responds. He made the back page in New York this last night.
Doing what?
He was
just out partying, or
no. It was about the game. So it was him hitting a layup.
Okay.
And it was on one of the back pages, and it was like the West Coast swing centered around him a little bit, which was interesting from a story perspective. Probably not to Kyrie's fancy, I imagine. And
it's just hard to know how those egos are going to work. Like, right now they're sharing the ball, and I think KD is fine. He obviously played with the Warriors, so he knows how to integrate himself with other high-level scorers, and so I'm not worried about him. Kyrie, I think, has his own sort of off-the-court issues, motivation of whether he wants to play, some of those kinds of things. So
sometimes I look at players and I go, I have a sense of what's going on in there. Like even if I disagree with your lifestyle or what you're doing, I can identify what's – Kyrie, I just have no idea what's happening.
He's a unique dude, that's for sure. I did want to point out a couple of noteworthy individual performances from this past week. Jamal Murray plays for the Nuggets.
Yeah.
Terrific player, fun to watch. He had a game last Thursday, I think it was, where he scored 50 points, which in and of itself is not outrageous in terms of, it's not like there's a 50-point game every night, but, there's probably one every few weeks in the NBA.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's fair. Yeah.
But what was unique about his 50-point night was the fact that he scored 50 points without attempting a single free throw, which has never happened in the NBA before.
Wow.
Think of all of the games played in NBA history. And, I don't know how many 50-point games there have been, but to score 50 and not attempt a single free throw is pretty remarkable.
He was 8 for 10 from three,
Yeah.
which is
and 21 for 25 overall.
yeah,
That's crazy. That's shooting 84% from the field.
that's impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a B in our world.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I think that's an A in the
that's
NBA
an
world.
A in his world.
Yeah, if we adjust the curve up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like my experience in seminary taking a class from Don Carson, and he had to adjust the curve. He had to put a curve on the quizzes he did, where if you got a 16 out of 20, an 80%, that was an A. Tells you how hard the quizzes were.
Yeah.
So, in any case, the other noteworthy individual performance was Joel Embiid also scored 50 points. What was unique about his performance, though, is that he made just one three-pointer. And in today's NBA, to score 50 points
just
without
doesn't happen.
hitting multiple threes is so rare. So some interesting individual performances there.
Joel Embiid, another interesting human.
Yes.
I have no idea what's going on in that head.
No clue. No clue.
You ever seen him eat a cheeseburger?
No.
It's something. It's something wild.
Why would I have seen him eat a cheeseburger? Is
He's
that
always
something on
eating-
social
he's-
media or something?
He's always eating a cheeseburger.
Okay.
He's getting his calf massaged, whatever. Dude's eating a cheeseburger.
Okay. That seemed like the most random question.
I'm going to hear about that one.
Probably.
Yeah.
College basketball. Things ramping up for the tournament. The game of biggest interest to me yesterday was Ohio State losing a tough one to that team up north, 92-87.
But good game.
Yes. If you did not have a rooting interest, it would have been arguably the most or one of the most entertaining college basketball games all season. High level play, shot making, just really good up and down basketball.
Potential Final Four preview there.
Potentially. And so Michigan came into the game ranked third. Ohio State came in ranked fourth, and both projected as one seeds.
Sure.
And every bracketologist I've seen has basically said, even though Ohio State lost that game, they're still a one seed. Like when you lose to another one seed in a close, high-level competitive game, it's like, well, you're still a one seed. Like you may not be the best one seed, or you still might be the fourth best one seed, but you're still a one seed. So we'll see. Ohio State's got some stuff coming down the road, and they could end up rematching in the Big Ten tournament, and who knows, even in the NCAA tournament.
Nice.
We'll see. It's also spring training days for baseball.
It's been fun to see the guys get out there and throw the ball around a little bit.
Yeah. Any breaking news from Mets camp this past week, John?
We signed Taijuan Walker to a 2-year deal worth, I can't remember how many millions, but yeah, he's going to wear the number 99 in camp and pitch for us. Also, Tim Tebow retired from baseball.
And I know that was a crushing blow for you. I mean, the series of weepy emojis that you sent me was very moving after hearing of that. So.
Well, most people find emojis just very moving, generally.
Indeed.
Yeah,
So
I think he was the oldest person. He would have been the second oldest on the Mets active roster. So those who were in the majors last year. He would have been the second oldest, and he never made a major league appearance. It was time to go.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, I hope you'll be able to move forward with your week with that sad news in the rearview mirror.
I'm coping. Sleep has been difficult, but we'll mush on.
Yes. Speaking of which, we will mush on to our main topic for the day.
Yeah, good word, mush.
Yeah. So we are last week we did an episode on baptism.
Yeah.
And so this week we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper. So talking about the two ordinances within the Protestant tradition. And
two pretty hotly debated things within the Protestant tradition, as well as the Catholic tradition and others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just as a reminder from last week. I think it's helpful to distinguish from the Protestant tradition. We refer to these as ordinances versus in the Roman Catholic tradition, they are sacraments, and the Roman Catholic tradition has several more beyond baptism and the Lord's Supper. The key difference being that in the Catholic tradition, grace is sort of seen as this almost like this material substance that you get by participating in the sacraments. So if you in fact get cut off from the church or excommunicated from the church, you are cutting yourself off from the means of grace in the Catholic tradition.
And so I've been – and maybe this will just kick things off for us – I've been rereading my church history book in preparation for teaching starting in – middle of March here. And one of the things that struck me in preparation and thinking about this episode was there were seasons in the Catholic Church where a emperor would do something that the Pope didn't like, and the Pope would withhold communion from him. And until this emperor came begging and groveling to the Pope to receive communion and ask forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. That view brings with it a whole set of entailments that are fascinating both on the political level as well as the ecclesiological level.
But
that is not our topic for the day. So John, why don't you just try to give us a brief summary of, again, we're envisioning you're talking with someone in a foreign culture who has no familiarity with Christianity. And they say, what is this communion or what is this Lord's Supper thing that Christians do?
Sure. I'd probably describe it as sort of a reenactment of what Jesus did with his disciples, breaking bread and drinking wine to remind us of what he has done on the cross for us. Probably at the time when he did it with the disciples, it was looking forward.
Yep.
But for us, it's looking back and reminding of Christ's body on the cross and Christ's blood that was spilt. And so we take bread and we drink most of the time in America grape juice, but although some traditions say drink wine still.
Yeah. And some churches give you the option.
Some churches do give you the option. Yeah. But as a way of remembering what is happening. There's no spiritual significance, I would say, in the midst of those elements, but as a way of remembering.
Yeah, so let's talk give a brief summary of kind of the main views on this within the Christian tradition, I guess, more broadly. You want to take the first one there? Or?
Sure,
okay.
Sure. So the way I would say the oldest one. Yeah.
I don't know about that. Maybe let's put it this way. This was the dominant view in the Catholic Church at the time of the Reformation, and is still this. My understanding is it's still the official view of the Catholic Church.
That's my understanding, although I think it's not talked about quite as much.
Yeah, because I don't know. I'd be hesitant to call it the oldest because I'm sure the Reformers went back into Augustine and the Church Fathers and were like, you can't find this view here.
So I think that's a good way of putting it. The dominant Catholic view at the time of the Reformation was something that we've come to call transubstantiation, which is a big word.
Yeah.
And the idea there is that the elements, the bread and the wine literally become the body and blood of Jesus.
Yeah. Once the priest pronounces the proper wording of blessing on those elements, they are. Mm-hmm. There's no symbolism. There's no. That is the actual physical body of Jesus. That's the bread that you see, but it's the physical body of Jesus, and that's the actual blood. They are transformed into
transubstantiation.
There you go.
And the Reformers had a great deal of problems with this.
And it also explains, by the way, that why in the Catholic tradition, which I'm not up on it currently, But I know for in many parts of the Catholic tradition, the common person is not allowed to actually drink the cup. They're only allowed to partake of the bread because of the fear of defiling the blood of Christ.
Interesting.
But, in any case,
well, Luther spoke out against this. Wycliffe, I think, was also put to death for his well, not put to death. He died a natural death, but they dug up his body and burned the bones and all sorts of stuff. It was very dramatic.
What level of spite must you have?
Yeah. But I think Wycliffe had a great deal to say about transubstantiation as well. The reformers were not fans of transubstantiation.
They were not. So that leads us to maybe the second view, which sort of was the next – you could almost see a progression here. This was Luther's view, consubstantiation. And the view there is that Christ is present in and around and with the elements in a real way, but the elements don't get transformed into the actual body and blood of Jesus.
Yeah.
So that was Luther's view.
And still the Lutherans' view.
That is my understanding, yes.
Although we are not Lutheran.
We are not.
So,
though I probably have more background. I mean, I have some Lutheran heritage in my background. So.
Yeah, this is the Midwest is a bit of a Lutheran hub.
Yeah. I
know Fort Wayne, Indiana, a lot of Lutherans.
Yes. Yep. And Northwest Ohio, where I grew up, also very predominantly heavy Lutheran influence, to be sure. Then you have the third view, which we'll call the spiritual presence view, which is a little more common among Reformed, non-Lutheran Reformed people. Okay, so here you've got Christ is spiritually present in a special way as the elements are used and experienced by the believer.
I think I'm least familiar with this view.
Yeah, it's a subtle difference, I think, in some ways from the memorial or the symbolic view where just the elements represent the body and blood of Jesus and there's no heightened presence of Jesus in the elements, where the spiritual view says that there is, as I understand it, there is some heightened experience of Christ's presence there. So that's just more to set the table, I think, so to speak, when it comes to the different views out there.
Set the table. I like what you did there. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily interested in hashing out the differences. More so, I am eager to maybe talk about some key biblical texts and then get into some of the theological significance and even just some practical implications from this. So John, what are some key biblical texts for dealing with the Lord's Supper? Or probably should mention some traditions refer to it as communion or the Eucharist, which that tends to be more of a term associated with Catholic practice. But
it's a good word. I mean, yeah. Some key text. Definitely from the Gospels. Where we see Jesus breaking the bread and giving the wine. I think the one I think of the most is 1 Corinthians 11.
Yeah.
Where Paul is giving instruction on how to give and take communion.
Yeah, that's by far the most explicit discussion of it. You know, as you mentioned in the gospel accounts, you've got the description of Jesus celebrating what's come to be known as the Last Supper. But we have to keep in mind that was a Passover meal.
Yes.
And so the Last Supper, which is the first celebration of the Lord's Supper or communion, in one sense was, you could argue, was the last Passover meal before sort of the turn of the redemptive ages takes place there. So therefore, I think we have to understand the practice of the Lord's Supper against the backdrop of Passover. So John, remind us what was Passover celebrating?
Yeah, Passover looked back to the Exodus, right, when God was going to take away the birth of all, or take the firstborn away from all of the Egyptians, kill the firstborn. However, the Hebrews could save themselves by putting the blood of a lamb on their doorpost and in a sense be covered by the blood of this lamb.
Yep.
And they would be passed over. Their house would not have their firstborn killed.
Yeah, and as part of that, they also ate a meal that involved the killing of the lamb and eating unleavened bread. And all of that symbolism was intended to remind the Israelites for generations to come about their deliverance from not just the Egyptians, but as you mentioned, of God's wrath, of his righteous wrath, and being rescued by the blood of the lamb provided. And when Jesus celebrates that Passover meal, all of that symbolism and significance is present. But when Jesus celebrates it, he makes it clear to his disciples that there's something new happening here, because he, as the fulfillment of the Passover lamb, is about to make the ultimate sacrifice for his people so that they can experience the ultimate exodus out of their bondage to sin, death, and the devil.
And be covered by the final blood of the lamb.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what's depicted in the gospel accounts. And in fact, in Luke's account, you have Jesus even explicitly saying, this is the blood of the new covenant, to pick up imagery from the Old Testament of that promised new covenant in Jeremiah and in Ezekiel and even in Isaiah as well. So
hard to be more explicit than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even one striking thing about this is that when you look at the description of the early church after Pentecost, so you have the day of Pentecost, you have the outpouring of the Spirit, 3,000 are saved, and there's a little paragraph at the end of that chapter, Acts 2, that describes what the common life of believers was, and included in there is the idea of the breaking of bread. And I think that probably includes the celebration of the Lord's Supper within that. But in any case, it seems like from the very beginning, from the earliest evidence we have of the church, that this was a key part of their worship.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly seems to be, and has passed down through church history as one of the important elements that regularly happens in the church.
Absolutely. And I do want us to get into some more, for lack of a better term, maybe some practical considerations. But I wanted to talk at least briefly about the theological significance. Like, what does the Bible itself show us that the meal represents? Even if you don't take a symbolic view of it, even these other views still recognize there is a symbolic aspect to this celebration. So I figured it'd be good for us to talk about that. You already mentioned sort of it's a remembering of the death, and I would even say the resurrection at some level of Jesus. The bread representing his body broken for us, and his blood shed for us, for our sins, for our forgiveness. But to be honest, there was an element of the Lord's Supper that I missed for so many years until reading more carefully through 1 Corinthians 11. And you read through the instructions that Paul gives in the face of some abuses that were taking place in the church at Corinth. They were doing it wrong, very wrong. And so Paul's trying to correct that. And one of the interesting things that he says in the context of that is that when you celebrate the Lord's Supper, that you do this in remembrance of him until he comes. That there's a future element.
That there's a looking forward.
There's a looking forward. So often we get wrapped up in the looking back, which of course is essential.
Which is a claim he says we need to take seriously. We need to be looking back.
It is intended as a remembrance to be sure. But it's not just a past-looking event. It is a forward-looking event to his return. And when you tie that in with the fact that one of the pictures that we are given of the consummation is the wedding supper of the Lamb, it seems like that part of that forward-pointing element is an anticipation of that great feast at the end of human history. And that's not the only place. I mean, Revelation 19 talks about it, but even in the Gospels, Jesus pictures the consummation as a great banquet feast that's being held, that people will come and recline at table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom. And so I think it's an anticipation of that greater reality of the full wedding feast that we will one day celebrate with the Lord.
Yeah. A good theology of food there, Matt.
Yeah,
good
absolutely.
Theology of food.
Yeah. So those are some of the, I think, the pieces of the theological significance. Let's talk some nuts and bolts here.
Okay.
Does it have to be real wine, John?
Well, I mean, if we're going to take the Bible literally, Matt, then maybe. No, I that is one of my favorite things to say to my friends that don't drink alcohol but want to take the Bible very literally. Is like, well, what about wine?
Yeah,
you want to take the Bible literally anyway. No, I don't think so. I think
you can address all of your critical comments to. No, I won't give. We'll send them to the email address.
Yeah, that comes to my phone. Truthfully, or you could Google my name on Grace's website, my email address,
or just add them at Twitter.
Yeah,
on Twitter,
you could do that too, or Facebook. Doesn't matter. But no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know if I have a better reason than, I think I've grown up with Welch's being sort of the primary. Communion juice.
Indeed. I think there's flexibility for practice there. I do. It needs to be the fruit of the vine. I think that's the key point.
Even a sugary fruit of the vine.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
But you would so if I could I know we're goofing around a little bit, but so I once heard of a pastor saying, "My goodness, let's take communion here on the beach. I got some Coca-Cola here. I've got some potato chips." Let's break this and take communion here.
Yeah, whatever that was, it was not the Lord's Supper.
Okay, so there is some parameters around it. It's
Yes.
not just any liquid whatsoever.
Correct. I think it has to be. I do think it has to be bread.
Okay,
and I do think it has to be some product of the vine.
Okay,
in view there. Yes. So, and here's where I'll make known. This is a fun anecdote from our own experience at our church. Are you familiar with the advent of the Harmon hunk?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard this story.
I think we need to tell our listeners
Yeah,
this.
Go ahead.
This is obviously pre-COVID days, but when we were celebrating the Lord's Supper in our church, it felt like the pieces of bread were getting increasingly smaller, like almost to the point where you're like, wow, this is barely recognizable as bread kind of thing. And so my wife and I were having a pleasant conversation with one of our deacons. And we just sort of tried to whimsically say, hey, what's the deal with this? And so he said to him, like, is there a budget issue? Like, tell us where we need to designate the funds if we need to get a bigger hunk of bread for communion here. And he laughed and explained some of why that was happening. And he said, "But you know what? I think we can do better." And so from that point forward, he referred to it as the Harmon hunk. And when they were breaking up the bread for the pieces,
had to be a certain size.
He actually created a sample Harmon hunk and showed it to the people who were cutting up the bread for communion and said, "This is the Harmon hunk. This is the prototype that you have to follow." So, I'm all about church reform, John. And
yeah.
I'm all about making a difference in the local church.
And I'm sure that day in church history will live on forever as we got a proper amount of Christ's body.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So on a more serious note, John, who should take communion?
Well, it's a debated topic.
Yes, it is.
And I wonder if we agree about this.
I don't know.
So I would probably be in the camp of believers take communion. Now, I know that the other side of the argument is baptized believers take communion.
Okay.
But I think I would argue for believers take communion.
Okay.
Not for any particular reason other than that's what I've always done and experienced.
Okay.
I think I was in a church for a time that it was a more closed communion. But yeah, I think my general argument would be – and not even an argument. My general belief probably would be without any sort of rationale or backup would be believers take communion.
Okay.
Are you on the baptized
That's where my sympathies lie.
Okay.
I don't have I'm not a staunch believer in that position. I think that's my preference because I think there's a logical relationship between baptism and communion. In other words, I think baptism as the ordinance that is the entry point into not just the Christian life, but also the body of Christ. I would say then that should be a condition for then participating in the Lord's Supper. But I'm sure not all of our listeners will necessarily agree with that. I do think, though, that one thing that I see sometimes that's a little concerning is sometimes I think parents are not always as discerning about not permitting their children to take communion. I think it's one of those things where I want to say half jokingly, it's not a snack.
You're giving me an eye like I did something. I don't have any children, Matt.
You don't. But I do think that there should be at least a clear profession of faith.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I think that's part of where baptism comes in as a definitive marker of that. So I think that's important as well. We've got a few other things here, but we need to probably start landing the plane on this. I feel like we are morally obligated to mention the distinctive practice of the Fellowship of Grace Brethren churches, which Grace College and Theological Seminary is a part of. Describe their unique practice in this area.
Yeah. So when they refer to the Lord's Supper or communion, they would say that there's three things that really need to be done for it to be considered communion or the Lord's Supper.
Yeah. Hence they call it the threefold communion.
Threefold communion. Yeah. The bread and the cup is one of them.
Yep.
Foot washing would be another.
Yep.
And then they get together and celebrate. They have a love feast, is what they call it. But
full meal.
A full meal, not just the bread and the cup. They have a full buffet style. Lots of them do buffet style meals, and it's I've been to a couple.
Okay,
they're quite delicious.
I have participated in a couple myself. I will stop short of saying I think that is a mandated practice within Scripture, but I will say I think it's absolutely permissible and might even be good and wise in many respects. I do think that there's very clear evidence, even from 1 Corinthians 11, that when the early Christians practiced communion, they did it as part of a larger meal, not just as the bread and cup. So that's an interesting practice from within our heritage here. Anything else on this on the subject of communion you wanted to bring up before we maybe give a couple of quick recommended resources?
I don't think so. Why don't we hit the resources?
Okay, let's do it. So just two I've got listed here. There's a Four Views book on the Lord's Supper edited by John Armstrong that we'll link to. And then Tom Schreiner and Matthew Crawford are the editors of a book called The Lord's Supper, Remembering and Proclaiming Christ Until He Comes. I think both of those are well worth
And we'll link those in the
Check
show
me out.
notes. And just by way of reminder, when we link a book, if you decide you want to purchase that book, please go through that link. We do get a small percentage of that, and it helps pay for things that the pod cost.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. All right. Are we ready for our athlete?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk athlete episode 60. And how do you want to do this?
I'm looking at some of the names, and I'm already horrified of trying to pronounce some of them. So maybe
You want me to take that?
yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll do it. Yep. So as we get to number 60, we're still in a window where there's not a ton of options.
They're slim pickings.
Yes. Chuck Bednarik was a linebacker for the Eagles in most of the 50s, from 1949 to 1962. He might be best known, though, because there's a major college football award for the best defensive player that has his name. So the Bednarik Award is given to the best
He played
defensive player.
linebacker
He's
and center.
Yeah. Well, it was back in the day.
Yeah, two-way player.
Next is Otto Graham, a quarterback for the Cleveland Browns.
Not many quarterbacks were in 60.
No. That was certainly before, in the days before there was a lot more structure as to what numbers can be worn by position in the NFL.
Yeah, but Otto Graham, legendary
Yes.
quarterback.
Legendary quarterback, was a member of the 75th anniversary and all NFL team. So a legend for the Browns, won numerous championships for them. And I think it's this I'm going to struggle over. Jose, I think it's Teodor. I think he's a goalie in the NHL, but I don't remember much about him besides the fact that apparently he wore number 60.
Yeah.
And then our OSU athlete is a man named Charles or Chuck. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly either. Kasuri or Sasuri,
Yeah.
C-S-U-R-I.
That was the one that scared me the most.
He was a tackle in the early 40s. More actually notably, he received a Bronze Star from fighting in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II.
Nice.
Okay, who you got?
I think there's only one option that I see. I think it's Otto Graham.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. Let's go with Otto Graham it is. So we are on to one thing you liked.
All right. Well, my one thing this week is as I'm preparing to teach church history next session, I'm reading through Bruce Shelley's Church History in Plain Language.
Yeah.
And I'm just reminded of how excellent a book that is.
It
Readable.
is fantastic.
Readable, tells stories of church. It doesn't cover everything, but it's a great introduction to church history.
Yep.
And I'll link it in the show notes.
And if someone asked me, Doc, I can read one book on church history, I'd probably point them there. It's not a short book, but it's well written. I mean, it's probably what? Is it 400 pages?
It's 500.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah.
But it's so well written, so engaging that it's worth it.
I have every year I have students who come to me and just go, 500 pages, Prof, what are you doing to us? And then they come back to me at the end and they're like, this was really engaging and readable.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well done. So for me, actually, I'm going to start with a disclaimer from my last week's recommendation. Last week I recommended a book an audiobook that told the story of this man who became a double agent to catch a Russian.
Oh, yeah.
How to Catch a Russian Spy.
Yeah.
I had started it at that point, was a decent ways in, and when I made the recommendation last week, I think there might have been, by that point where I was at, maybe like one or two examples of some profanity. Let me just warn you, listener, that as you continue forward, there is a significant ratcheting up of profanity. So I want to – there's some content there that you certainly don't want to pop that in. You've got kids in the car, or if you're especially sensitive to strong profanity.
Matt Harmon recommending R-rated material.
Yes, yes. But my actual one thing I liked this week was we had a visit from Zach in Ohio.
Yeah.
He was on campus talking with students about the internship program that they have at his church there in Ohio. And we had the privilege of interviewing him for the hostile, not so hostile takeover of the Grace Story podcast that will get posted in March.
The encouraged takeover.
Yeah, the requested.
Yeah.
Requested. And
Zach's a great interview.
Yeah, it was fun. And we also got lunch with him that day. You, me, and
Brent,
our campus, our dean of chapel, Brent. And then at the end of the day, he swung by our house so we could feed him. So it was fun.
Old times.
Yes. It was great to catch up with him. So that was my one thing I liked. So today we've talked some NBA, some college basketball. We've lamented the retirement of Tim Tebow.
End of an era.
We've talked the Lord's Supper. We've regaled you with tales of the Harmon Hunk and my attempts to reform the church single-handedly through size of communion bread. We have discussed Otto Graham. I don't know about discussed, but we've mentioned him.
We named him.
Yes, we've named him. We have talked church history in plain language, and we've talked about our not-so-hostile takeover of another podcast.
Yeah, and a disclaimer in there as well.
Yes. So I think by definition, we've covered our various and sundry topics. Are you ready to call mission accomplished?
I am.
Okay. So I think all that leaves is for us to say, the Lord bless you all real good.
Later.